I stepped out of the taxi, smoothing the front of my dress blues, the medals on my chest feeling heavier than usual. The quiet anticipation of finally being home after 6 months in a high-security zone was the only thing keeping me standing. But then I looked up. Planted right in the middle of my perfectly mowed lawn was a sign in bold red letters. Sold. Behind it, 2 men in coveralls were hauling my life out the front door. My books, my framed commendations, my clothes, and tossing them into a dumpster like they were trash. Standing on the porch, watching it happen with beers in their hands, were my father, Richard, and my brother, Caleb. Richard didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just pointed a lazy finger at the dumpster and said, "You don't live here anymore." We cashed out. Before I tell you what I found in that dumpster, and the secret document that was about to destroy their entire celebration, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I adjusted the strap of my bag and started walking up the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel with a rhythm I'd perfected over a decade of service. My name is Jordan, and I'm 29 years old. In my line of work, high-level logistics and intelligence for special operations, you learn very quickly that the loudest person in the room is usually the most vulnerable. Panic is a luxury I couldn't afford overseas, and I certainly wasn't going to spend it on these two. As I closed the distance, I saw Richard's eyes flicker. He expected a tantrum. He expected the hysterical daughter he could gaslight into submission. Instead, he got a ghost. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at them. The power dynamic was physically designed to make me feel small, but I'd never felt taller. "Caleb got into some trouble," Richard said, taking a swig of his beer as if discussing a fender bender. "He owes the wrong people a lot of money. $120,000, to be exact. We had to act fast." "We?" I asked, my voice flat. "I don't remember being part of the we that decided to liquidate my assets. Family sacrifices for family, Jordan." He snapped, the old manipulation rolling off his tongue like scripture. "You're single. You live in barracks half the time anyway. You don't need a house. Your brother needed a lifeline." I looked at the house behind him. I remembered the day I bought it. I was 22, fresh off my first combat tour, clutching a check made up of hazard pay and sleepless nights. That house wasn't just wood and drywall. It was the only place in the world where I didn't have to watch my back. I had renovated it with my own hands, sanding the floors until my fingers bled, painting the walls a soft gray that finally quieted the noise in my head. I remembered Richard standing in this exact spot back then, telling me I was selfish for buying property when Caleb was struggling to make rent. They tried to make me feel guilty for having stability then. Now, they were punishing me for it. But they made a critical error in their assessment. They thought they had stripped me of my armor. They didn't realize that the house was just a building. The fortress was inside me, and they couldn't touch that. "You used the power of attorney," I stated. "It wasn't a question. You signed it," Caleb chimed in, a smirk playing on his lips. He raised his wrist to check the time, and the sunlight caught the heavy gold face of a brand new Rolex. It was flashy, expensive, and bought with a deposit on my sanctuary. "It was legal, sis. Dad saved my life. You should be happy you could help." He didn't look saved. He looked well-fed and arrogant. A parasite who had finally consumed enough of the host to feel powerful. "I signed a power of attorney for medical decisions," I said, my eyes locking onto the watch. "In case I came back in a box. Not so you could loot my life while I was still breathing." "It's done," Richard said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "The buyer is signing the final transfer in 10 minutes. The money for the loan sharks is already wired. You can stay at the motel by the highway until you redeploy. It's not a big deal." That was the moment the last thread of attachment snapped. It wasn't just theft. It was erasure. To them, I wasn't a person with a life, a future, or rights. I was a resource to be harvested. I was an inventory item they could liquidate to cover their bad investments. They hadn't just sold my house. They had sold me. I looked from the Rolex to Richard's defiant glare. "Is the buyer here?" I asked. "She's inside doing a final walkthrough," Richard said. "Don't you dare make a scene, Jordan. She paid cash. We need this deal to close." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that I usually reserved for enemy combatants. "I wouldn't dream of making a scene," I said, stepping onto the porch. "I just want to meet the new owner." The door opened before I could knock, and a woman in a beige pantsuit stepped out. This was Sarah. One look told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't a family looking for a starter home. She was an investor, sharp eyes, expensive manicure, the kind of person who scans a room looking for profit margins instead of warmth. She held the deed in her hand like a weapon. "You must be the daughter," she said, her tone dismissive. She didn't offer a handshake. "Your father told me you might stop by. Look, honey, it's done. The papers are signed." The money is transferred. I need you off my property before I call the cops. I glanced past her. Richard was standing by the kitchen island, holding a bank receipt with trembling hands. His face was flushed with the kind of high that comes from dodging a bullet. He looked up, saw me through the open door, and grinned a wide, triumphant expression that made my stomach turn. "It's over, Jordan," he called out, waving the receipt. 120,000, wired straight to the loan sharks. Caleb is clear. The rest is already in a secure account. You can't touch it. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't conflicted. He was proud. He thought he had pulled off the heist of the century against his own child. I looked back at Sarah. "You wired the full amount?" $650,000, she said, checking her watch. "Cash. It cleared 10 minutes ago. Now, seriously, get off my porch." I didn't move. I let the silence stretch, watching Richard's celebration and Sarah's impatience. This was the moment. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the cage door had just slammed shut. "You really should have waited for the title search," I said softly. Sarah scoffed. "I buy distressed properties for cash all the time. I skip the red tape to beat the market. I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The document I pulled out wasn't a weapon, but it was about to do more damage than any rifle I'd ever carried. Because if you had run a title search, you would have seen that Richard doesn't own this house. He has power of attorney. Sarah snapped, though her eyes flicked nervously to the paper in my hand. I saw the document myself. "He has a general power of attorney," I corrected, "which allows him to act on behalf of Jordan the individual. But Jordan the individual doesn't own this property anymore." I unfolded the document and held it up. It was a certified copy of a deed transfer, stamped and dated 48 hours before I deployed. "I transferred the title to the Jordan Revocable Living Trust 6 months ago," I said, my voice cutting through the air like glass. "My father isn't a trustee. He has no authority over the trust's assets. He can't sell what he doesn't own." I looked past her to Richard, who had frozen mid-celebration. The receipt in his hand suddenly looked less like a trophy, and more like an indictment. "That signature on your sale contract?" I pointed to the papers in Sarah's hand. "That's not a sale. That's forgery. And since you wired the money across state lines based on fraudulent documents, that's federal wire fraud." Sarah snatched the paper from my hand. Her eyes scanned the legal text, the dates, the trust seal. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. The deed she was holding, the one she'd just paid over $500,000 for, was worthless. "You," she whispered, looking up at Richard. "You said you had full authority." "I do," Richard shouted, rushing to the door, panic cracking his voice. "I have the POA. It's right here. Read the fine print, Dad," I said coldly. "It covers medical decisions and personal accounts. It does not cover assets held in a trust. You just sold a house you don't own to a woman who just lost $650,000. I turned back to Sarah. Her shock was rapidly mutating into a predator's rage. "Give me my money back," she hissed, turning on Richard. "Right now. Reverse the wire." Richard stumbled back, hitting the counter. I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" Sarah stepped into the house, her expensive heels clicking like gunshots on the hardwood floor. "Transfer it back. Now." "I already sent the money for Caleb," Richard screamed, the truth tearing out of him. "It's gone. The loan sharks took it. I can't get it back." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah stared at him. Caleb stared at the floor. And I just watched, feeling the cold, dark satisfaction of a mission accomplished. They had wanted quick cash. They had wanted to bypass me. Instead, they had walked straight into a minefield I'd laid months ago. And now, there was nowhere left to run. Sarah stared at Richard, her face contorted into a mask of pure, predatory fury. The businesslike veneer she'd worn minutes ago evaporated, replaced by the terrifying realization that she had just been conned out of more than $500,000. She took a step toward him, and for a second, I thought she might physically attack him. "You wired it," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You wired my money to a criminal enterprise." "It was a loan," Richard stammered, backing away until he hit the refrigerator. Sweat was beading on his forehead, running down into his collar. I can get it back. I just need a few days. We can fix this." "Fix this?" Sarah laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "You don't have days. You don't have hours. You committed grand larceny. That money was from my investors. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She didn't wait for an answer. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "I want to report a fraud in progress. Significant theft." "Yes, the perpetrator is still here." Richard watched her make the call, his eyes wide and vacant. Then, Slowly, his gaze shifted to me. The panic in his expression hardened into something else, something ugly and familiar. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't guilt. It was the white-hot indignation of a narcissist who had just been exposed in front of an audience. "You did this," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. I stood my ground, leaning against the doorframe with my arms crossed. "I didn't sign the papers, Richard. I didn't wire the money." "You knew," he screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged forward, stopping only because Caleb grabbed his arm. "You stood there and watched me do it. You let me sign those papers. You let me send that money. I gave you a choice," I said calmly. "I asked you if you wanted to tell me the truth. You chose to lie. You chose to double down. You set me up," he roared. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking past me, out the open front door where Mr. Halpern and a few other neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the yelling. That was the real injury. It wasn't the handcuffs that terrified him. It was the humiliation. The loss of his carefully curated image as the benevolent patriarch. "You wanted to humiliate me," he yelled, pacing the small kitchen like a trapped animal. "You wanted your neighbors to see this. You wanted to make your own father look like a criminal." "You are a criminal," I corrected. I just turned on the lights. "I raised you," he yelled, rewriting history to protect his ego. "I gave you everything and this is how you repay me? By tricking me? By ruining your brother over a house you don't even use?" I finally understood. Even facing prison, he couldn't imagine himself as the villain. My independence felt like betrayal. My survival felt like an attack. "I didn't trick you," I said calmly. "I protected myself. If my safety feels like a trap to you, that says everything." Sirens wailed outside. Red and blue lights flooded the room. Sarah gave the dispatcher his name. Caleb sat on the floor, muttering. The rage drained from my father as he saw the police. "Maria," he pleaded, switching tactics. "You can stop this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'm your father. You stopped being my father when you treated me like a bank account." The officers moved in and cuffed him without resistance. Neighbors watched as the man who ruled this house was led away. I thought it was over until Caleb blocked my path. "You think you won," he said, holding up his phone. On the screen was a drafted email to my division's inspector general, accusing me of selling stolen military equipment, fake invoices, a forged bank transfer. "One accusation like this," he whispered, "and your clearance is gone. Drop the charges. Sign the house over." Or I hit send. I didn't beg. I laughed. "Go ahead," I said. "Send it." He froze. "My finances are audited every month," I continued. "Your fake documents don't match federal records. If you send that, you're not exposing me, you're confessing." His phone dropped. Panic replaced arrogance. I raised my hand to the officers. "He's attempting extortion with falsified military documents. I want to press charges." They cuffed him too. He screamed that it was a joke. Intent was enough. As the cruisers drove away, the weight finally lifted. I wasn't anyone's shield anymore. I pulled the sold sign from the lawn and threw it into the trash. Inside, the house was empty and quiet. For the first time in years, no one needed saving. I changed the security codes. One clean beep confirmed it. I wasn't happy yet, but I was safe, and that was enough. If you've ever had to become the villain in someone else's story just to survive, share this. 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 Survive, share this.